Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. How does one define and explain the Trump administration's foreign policy? The answer one often gets from pundits and even officials in the White House is two words: America first. But what does that mean? Is it just an expression of self-interest, or is it about expanding the very geography of the United States? In a moment, I will speak with a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian who has written extensively about the Americas and US foreign policy more broadly. As always, we channel subscriber questions in these conversations. If you are not yet a member, join FP now. Use the code FP Live for a nice discount. That's FP Live, one word. You can also find this program on our free podcast, also called FP Live, as well as on our app. So, is US President Donald Trump an expansionist president? He's talked openly about buying Greenland, about invading Canada, and taking over the Panama Canal. He's bombed Iran this year, and his White House has also been attacking boats off the coast of Venezuela, reportedly in a bid to foment regime change in Caracas. All of this contradicts his campaign rhetoric, where he criticized the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and promised to end US involvement in foreign wars. So, how does all of that add up? Can history illuminate some of the Trump administration's choices? Well, I think I have the perfect guest to think through these questions. Greg Grandin is a professor of history at Yale University who won the Pulitzer Prize for his book, The End of the Myth: From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America. His most recent book is America, America, A New History of the New World. Greg Grandin, welcome to FP Live.
Thanks for having me, Robbie.
So let's start with an acronym we've all become familiar with, MAGA, or Make America Great Again. And Greg, MAGA has begun to evoke making America not just great, but greater in size. Talk to us a little bit about this current mood of expansionism.
Well, this is something that seemed to have come out of nowhere during Trump's second inaugural address, where he talked about Canada and Greenland and possibly taking over, retaking the Panama Canal zone. I mean, so it's like many things like Trump. It's kind of hard to figure out. It seems like he rummages through the trash bin of U.S. history and pulls out whatever suits him. I think he's actually not an expansionist president in the way that I would use the term, which we could talk about later. But he is in many ways really the first kind of batten down the hatches president. Really he is the president during his first term that substituted the myth of the frontier for the new symbol, a new myth, and that is the border and the wall. That became the kind of articulating center of all of his many constituencies. And he invokes America first, despite occasionally talking about taking over Greenland. Well, those things seem to have fallen by the wayside. I haven't heard about Greenland in quite a while, or annexing Canada as the 51st state. I mean, what we got is the symbolic renaming of the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, which I think is still holds on Apple Maps.
You know, I mean, you talked about the trash bin of history, but explain a little bit what's in that trash bin, as it were. I mean, James Madison wrote about extending the sphere as far back as 1787. There is a long history in the sort of American understanding of the frontier as being something that one can expand and should expand. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, in a lot of American exceptionalism means a lot of things to different people, but I think one thing that does make the United States unique is this both the ideal of expansion and the reality of expansion. I mean, sure there have been other empires. The British Empire ruled over, the world. The sun never set on the British Empire, but I don't think any self-proclaimed nation like the United States had the promise of expansion built into its very fundamentals. Right from the beginning, there was this idea among the founders that the United States was going to reach the Pacific. And when we talk about the frontier, of course, we're talking about the landed frontier, and we're talking about Indian removal, and we're talking about wars against Mexico to get to the Pacific. But we're also just talking about the ideal of limitlessness, right? And the
Hmm.
use of limitlessness to organize domestic politics, right? The ideal of a frontier is infinitely useful because it could be projected into infinity.
So
You
I
can
just want to
constantly
linger.
go.
I want to sort of double click on that point because you've written a lot about how nationalism is inward looking. If it is inward looking, it can be destructive. So exactly what you were just saying, the possibility of looking outside allows you then to not self-destruct, as it were, but to keep expanding
Yeah.
frontiers, but also the myth.
Yeah, it does a lot of work. The both the reality and the ideal of expansion. The landed frontier was an enormous bank of wealth for the new nation in terms of land, in terms of minerals, in terms of plant cultivation. But then the promise of limitlessness was a way of venting social discontent, right? Other nations had to deal with the labor problem. They had labor parties organizing. The United States never had a labor party because it had a safety valve. It could constantly use the promise of limitlessness in order to reconcile internal contradictions. The trauma generated from the last war could be rolled over into the next war, right? The furies were constantly vented out with all of the violence and brutality associated with Western expansion could be kept on the margins, and the United States could imagine itself in the 20th century emerging as a bastion of liberalism, as a bastion of internationalism, and that's only possible as long as the frontier was maintained, was kept open, and that's why I do think Trump is a turning point. I do think even though he denies climate change, I think he's the first climate change politician because he comes at a moment when limitlessness is no longer nobody. The Iraq War, the financial crisis of 2008, and the reality of climate change has made that promise of limitlessness
Mm.
untenable. So Trump is the scarcity president. We've got to
Wow.
batten down.
There, I take your point about geography here, but there are a few other dimensions to this, right? So there's economic conquests, technological conquests, AI, of course, the race for critical minerals, the scramble for rare earths and other resources. Those are, in a sense, the new frontiers,
Yeah, but
for this
notice,
century.
but notice that under the Trump administration, it's not the vision isn't a liberal international order superintended by the United States. There's a sense that the global order has fractured into competing superpowers, and it's a scramble for resources and advantage, right? Under the old liberal order, or what people like to call the rules-based order, right? Let's set aside the gap between reality and ideal. There was a sense that all boats would rise. Everybody could sit at the table if they just followed a few certain rules. Trump is the president that says no, not everybody could sit at the table. Not all boats will rise. It's a competition. The world order should be organized around competition and strategic advancement, not a superintendence of a set of common economic beliefs, even if those beliefs weren't actually applied in practice often.
Hmm. And Greg, this is where I think history is so useful to situate a current moment and try and see, whether elements of it were inspired by the past, to see whether, we often use the word unprecedented, but is it really? And I've been in preparing for this interview, looking at your last book, and I was struck by one of the things you described about how, about a century ago, Latin American diplomats tried to push Washington to accept a vision of cooperative international law. And so the rules-based order as it is, America sort of came reluctantly to it.
Yeah, I mean, think of it this way. The United States came into the world a lone nation on what its founders imagined to be an empty or an empty enough continent. Obviously, there were Native American polities, there was Spain, there was Mexico, but there was no doubt the United States was going to reach the Pacific, if not take over Canada, as Trump would want, and then Mexico, as almost did happen. Latin America, Spanish America, came into the world already a League of Nations, seven independent republics, and Brazil, which was a monarchy but an independent monarchy. So eight polities that had to learn to live with each other. The United States' theory of sovereignty was conquest. It revived the doctrine of conquest, to Indian removal, pushing west. They used the doctrine of conquest to justify taking half of Mexico. Now, what would have happened if Argentina did that? If Argentina said, we justify our sovereignty with the doctrine of conquest and we want the Pacific, they're gonna would be it would lead to endless wars.